The two-party system is destroying our country.
The question is, Justice, the radical left, would you shut up?
A completely gridlocked Congress and candidates who employ extreme rhetoric and appeal to the most radical parts of their base to win elections. This has slowly progressed for a long time, but it has now reached fever pitch. We haven't seen this much vitriol, this much hatred toward the other side since the American Civil War.
You know, the founders of this country did not intend us to run this country with political parties.
They intended independent civil servants to run our government on behalf of its citizens. We're now at an inflection point, a fork in the road.
It begs the question, what do we do about it?
We as independents envision a government that truly serves us, optimizing healthcare, education, the environment, and defense to improve the quality of life for everyone in this country.
Over 100 million other Americans have come to the same conclusion. They're leaving the parties in droves and declaring their independence.
We're ready for something new, and this is what the Independent National Convention is all about.
This is a moment in time for us to reclaim our American government, to reclaim the republic that is the United States of America, to reclaim our role as American citizen stewards, to realize that we are the founders of what happens next.
Hello and welcome to the Functional Forum. We are here at the Independent National Convention. It is political season and we are here to see if the values of the independent political movement in America align with our values. It's going to be an interesting hour. Enjoy. So to help you understand why it was important that we came here to be part of this movement, I am here with the CEO of the United Independent Movement, Christopher Life. So Christopher, let us know a little from the practitioners who are watching this, what is the Independent National Convention?
The Independent National Convention is a gathering of change makers from across the country who know that the solution that we need for our society going forward will not be produced by the existing Republican Democratic parties. The Republican and Democratic parties as a duopoly have controlled the political landscape of our country for a very long time, and we've seen the results. And from a health standpoint, if you judge the success of the Republican and Democratic parties leading this country based upon the health results of this country, we say that they completely failed, right? So we have to change something fundamental, not only as how our health system works, but how our political system works in relationship to our health system in order to be able to get the health results that we want for our brothers and sisters in this country and for our society generally. And so we have hundreds of different organizations and individuals coming together to discuss and collaborate and ideate and inspire each other on how we build a stronger center of gravity around the U.S. independent movement so we can be more effective at putting American citizens in stewardship of our public institutions as opposed to parties and corporate interests. And that is a critical component of a national phase change process to create political transformation in this country. And that's critical so we have the political leadership in place that's actually aligned with producing positive health outcomes as opposed to aligned with serving profit interests that prioritize profit over real patient value.
Beautiful. And just for clarity, because obviously, there's a lot of pieces to it. What isn't this conference and this movement?
So we created this event to juxtapose the Republican and Democrat national conventions, where those conventions are predominantly nomination conventions that focus on their presidential candidates. This is about building the movement. This is about every person's role and empowering people through education, inspiration, and building relationships with how they can play a meaningful role in building the U.S. independent movement, which we refer to here as the United Independent Movement. That independence in silos, millions and millions of independents, but working in small silos for decades. And as the sentiment of the country increases towards independence, now is a moment in time to break out of those silos and emerge as a national political force. And to kind of come back to the health conversation, one of the things that we're imbuing into the core genetics of this movement is the conversation around health. And so we've brought James as one of our partners to the Independent National Convention to help to activate the conversation around how to think about true healing, how to think about community-based healing solutions, how to think about health, self-healing solutions. We have 3 different panels here at the conference on health. One's looking at alternative health solutions, one's looking at healing through community, and one's looking at mental health and why that needs to be a national priority. So we're really wanting to ground true health into the conversation around building the U.S. independent movement, both because it's a critical component of leadership that we need to be bringing forward, and also because it's a huge tangential movement which we can actually bring together to form this united independent movement, bringing so many folks from the health space into it.
What would get you excited about someone from our community, a doctor or a community organizer who's run one of our meetup groups, putting their hat in the ring for local office in 2026?
Yeah, so 100%. I mean, ultimately, when we see a gap between how the world is and how the world could be, whatever that is, then we have a responsibility for stepping up to fill that gap. And for some people, that gap can be filled by running for office. And running for office can enable you to be able to communicate with your community members and have a platform to talk to your community members about health in the process of running the campaign. And then if you're successful in being elected, then now you're not outside of city council or outside of whatever that public institution is asking for change. You're actually stepping forward to be the creator and the steward of that change. So I think it's a very powerful thing for people to consider if they have that call.
Amazing. Well, we're glad to be here. We're super excited to share some of the highlights from those panels. Later today, we've got some incredible longer interviews with some of the key people who are here. Thanks so much for inviting us, and we're excited to watch this movement grow and be a part of it and synergize with it over the years to come.
Thanks for your partnership, buddy.
A few years ago, when I brought out the book, The Community Cure, I connected with the founder of the independent movement, Christopher Life, and shared with him the vision of the Community Cure. And from that moment on, that book has been intimately connected with his vision for the transformation of healthcare. And therefore, I was at this conference putting together a panel on new modes of healing, specifically around community. So one of the people that I was excited to bring from my hometown in California was Eldra Jackson. I've known Eldra for a couple of years, and he is doing transformational work inside the prison system. We sat down with an extended interview with him. Enjoy. Right, I am here with Eldra Jackson. It's the Independent National Convention. Great to be here with you and excited for our first interview together.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Right, to get the people who are watching engaged into this conversation, you started an organization called Inside Circle, and that delivers groups in prisons, and people who have been part of those groups have a 0%
recidivism rate.
How is that possible?
Well, it is, from my experience, it is possible because the folks who participate in the program alter their thinking. They alter their physical makeup, their constitution. What we do is support individuals getting into trauma. Usually that has something to do with something great that has happened in their childhood, and we create the possibility for them to go back and revisit that trauma, and that rescripts the way that I think. It rescripts the relationship that I have with that trauma. And so I come out of that place as an adult, bringing that child with me with a renewed sense of purpose.
Amazing. So let's go back to the beginning. Give us a little bit of an understanding of like how you got into this and how you found yourself in a position to start this organization.
So I found myself becoming a part of this organization while I was serving life in the California prison system. I did 24 years of a life sentence, and the organization the groups had actually begun when I arrived at New Folsom. Today, I'm the executive director of the organization, but I came in about 8 years after the programming had begun. And so today we go into prisons, not just in California, but across the country and around the world. I just got back from Holland. We did our first circles in the largest prison in that country there at Zaanstad.
No, can't believe it. Am I right in thinking that in Holland, like the prison population is going down anyway? Is that right?
I don't know that it's going down. The prison that we were at had 1,000 people in it. So it held 1,000 people. We met some people from The Hague, and they are looking at this model that we have going on here, and they communicated to us that they want to roll this out in every prison in the country.
So give us an understanding of like what some of those early groups look like and what the environment is like that you're facing when you're putting on those first groups that you experienced.
So the first groups began in a maximum security prison in New Folsom, California. And so everybody on the yard is either doing life or they have hundreds of years to do. There's no hope of going home. And the genesis of this was following a major racial riot in 1996. It was one of those things that they let go on for 40 minutes. A lot of people died. A lot of people were medevaced out to local hospitals. And there was a man named Patrick Nolan who had gotten to a point where he had just become sick and tired of being sick and tired of the senseless killing. So in those first circles, in that maximum security crucible, what it was really about was just trying to figure out ways to stop killing one another. And it evolved into what people refer to now as healing circles. Men in those circles found ways to heal the divide between the gangs, between the races, and between the cultures.
One of the things that I've talked about a lot is the role of safety in healing. And this is an extreme example of where there's no safety. How do you create safety in that sort of environment?
Simple agreements. There are 6 simple agreements that were in the very first circles, and here almost 30 years later they continue to exist. There's anonymity. What's said in those spaces remains in those spaces. No violence. Speak truth. Don't come higher loaded. Everyone has the right to pass, and we encourage people to speak from the I perspective. That creates a container in which individuals can begin to see not just themselves, but see themselves in other people and see other human beings.
Obviously, there's huge psychosocial transformation that happens through those groups. So I think that's obvious. Can you give some examples of things that you've seen over time of like actual physical health transformations that you've seen from men? Because I'm sure prison is just a subset of America. There's unhealthy. It's unhealthy there too, right?
Yes, it's unhealthy there. I can speak to 2 things, one inside of prison and one outside of prison. So I myself was diagnosed while I was inside with what they called, they told me it was benign gynecomastia, growths on my chest. And I went in, saw the doctor, and that's what they diagnosed it as. And they set me up for surgery. I went back 4 months later and the growths had completely disappeared. And the doctors asked me, what happened? I said, well, you're the doctors. You tell me. The only thing that I've been doing is going to group, and walking this spiritual path. That's one piece. And we have evolved to doing these circles outside for the community. So anybody can come. We're trying to change the narrative and invite anybody into this. This is human work. And we had a young lady who had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And she was told by her doctor she had 18 months to live. That was 8 years ago.
Wow. It's amazing.
And she credits this work with her transformation in health.
So what is the scope of the organization today? And like, if people who are watching know people who work in the prison system, how can they help to get the word out and spread it?
So the scope of the work today is to empower system-impacted people to lead change from within. That's both from within the human soul, within the human spirit, and from within inside of our systems. And the way that folks can get the word out is by going to insidecircle.org, looking us up, contacting, and investigating what we do. There's a documentary titled The Work that was filmed while I was still inside. It chronicles a 4-day intensive inside, and it pretty much shows in as best a context as you can what it is that we do, and reach out. If there's interest, we have teams that will come.
That's on Netflix, right?
That is on Netflix.
Okay, it's on Netflix.
And Amazon.com.
Amazon.com, The Work, check it out. Check out Eldra and his work, and let's work together to spread this. Thank you so much.
Let's heal the world.
Not many physicians at INC, but I found one of them, Dr. Lara Ler. Doc, tell us a little bit about how you got here and your journey in medicine.
Well, I got here because I was volunteering for RFK Jr.'s campaign, and I thought that he was going to be presenting here.
Yeah.
So I signed up as a volunteer so I'd get to see him. And as you know, he canceled, but I subsequently learned that you would be here. and that Zack would be here.
Yeah.
And that was a second motivation to come and meet you and see what could come from that. My background is in internal medicine. I worked at the county hospital here for 14 years, and I ended up leaving because of cognitive dissonance, which I think a lot of physicians are experiencing, a lot of moral injury, a lot of being put into positions where we have to do things that are against our values because of systemic constraints. And I'm really interested in root cause healing. And I'm interested in root cause healing for the medical system itself. And so I started looking at how do we get a shift in the paradigm? And I realized really we're creating the culture. We're perpetuating it through our own limiting beliefs, through our, I want to say brainwashing, through indoctrination that we went through through our training. And through, I think, institutionalized traumatization and dehumanization during our training as well, that we have now normalized. And we continue to treat each other from that place of wounding. And so, long story short, I think we shift the medical paradigm by healing ourselves. Physician, heal yourself.
I love that. I love that so much. And what out of this today so far has inspired you, and what do you think is next?
What's inspired me is I have discovered that I'm probably here for other reasons besides what I realized initially, and that I didn't think I was interested in the political side of this at all, but I'm learning more about the independent movement, and I feel like I want to put my weight and my energy behind that in some way. And I don't know what that will look like yet. But I think that's a good use of my time and energy.
Good. Well, I look forward to watching the next phase of your career. Thanks so much for being here, sharing your story, and good luck.
Thank you.
All right, I'm here with Jeffrey Rose, clinical hypnotherapist and clinical nutritionist, one of the legends of the early functional forum, in New York, coming to all my events and, getting to spend some time together. Haven't spent as much time together recently, but you've been busy. Tell us a little bit about why you came here.
Okay, I came here originally because Bobby Kennedy was going to be speaking, and I've been a friend of his for over 30 years. In fact, there was a big gap where I hadn't seen him from Riverkeeper, Waterkeeper when he moved to California, but he was at your event when he launched the World Mercury Project, which then morphed into Children's Health Defense. So it's a great opportunity to catch up with him and to see that he's on board with holistic health and, let's say, medical freedom, for that matter. So I think when it comes to independent conference, even though Bobby Kennedy's not speaking here today, the people that are here care about the same issues: clean air, clean water, clean body. So you're finding independent thinking. They're more interested in regenerative farming, for example, and organic, for that matter, and personal responsibility, and not looking for government to be the answer, because we find government usually interferes with things. So they're pushing pharmaceutical, like they did with COVID. So it's a great network of people here. I'm finding Mary Williamson's going to be speaking here, Andrew Wang's going to be speaking here, and I think a lot of people that really care about health and wellness more so than you're going to find at a DNC or RNC, for that matter.
One of the features of the early functional medicine movement, and it's changing now as it kind of grows and becomes more mainstream, was you had to be an independent practice to kind of really break out and practice a new standard of care. It's interesting how there's some crossover features of the independent political movement and functional medicine. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm noticing that, because I think if you're independent thinking, you're not beholden to one, let's say, mythology or one kind of group, a Democrat or Republican. You're on your own. So you're doing critical thinking, you're looking at all the information, whether is pharmaceutical the best way to prescribe that for people, as opposed to altering your diet, sleeping better, eating better, exercising, doing all the right things. So I think when you're finding independent people are going to be independent in many areas, not just with medicine, but philosophically and politically, nationally. So,
Well, thanks for your support over the years. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you, James.
So I had the privilege of organizing one of the panels on new models for health. And what we're going to do is take you inside on that panel and check out some of the best bits. Enjoy. We have an incredible panel here today. One of the things about this health revolution is that it has to be holistic in nature, and we have to think about the body in all its different ways. And so what better way? It actually sounds like the beginning of a joke. you have a health guru, a dentist, and a therapist walk into a bar. But it's not really a joke, it's actually very serious.
So my contention is that our mental health and the best that psychology has to offer is one of the biggest missing pieces in social, cultural, and political conversation, agenda, and policy today. And my book and my work is really designed to try to make public knowledge, common knowledge, the best healing principles that we could bring to our country.
Wonderful, great.
We have all the solutions. We have so many solutions already ready. It's just there's a little bit of a barrier to getting to that. And so that's what we are. We're the agents of getting to the information, to the solutions. The technology is here, the accessibility is here, and that's what my focus is making regenerative wellness affordable, attainable, and accessible, and we're recruiting. So come on, we had a team.
And I want to just share, over the last few years, Christopher and I have been involved to think about how could this actually happen and what is a first step. And I just want to share what I've been in the business of for the last 10 years is organizing conversations like this with people like this in every zip code of this country and actually all over the world. Imagine there are practitioners, not exactly like these four here, but similar in terms of what they do. There's biological dentists, there's all types of practitioners that are involved in human health. There's doctors that are getting it and are practicing in new ways, integrative functional medicine, lifestyle medicine. There are psychotherapists that care about this. And so my contention and one of the pathways that I would offer, and this is actually a course that we made with the United Independence Movement, is if I was going to run for office in 2026, the way that I might think about doing that, if this kind of conversation resonates with you, and by the fact that you're here in this room, I'm hoping that it does, is by organizing all of the practitioners that are in the service of human health in your zip code. What a way to develop influence so that you could run in 2 years and have a shot. And over the last 10 years ago, we started something called the Functional Forum. It was a meetup for doctors in New York that were interested in human health and were interested in new models of health. That spread all over the country. And now you have, in many cities around the country, you have hundreds of doctors who have built coherence and connection and trust from showing up at events monthly and connecting with each other. And my contention is that the person who organizes that event is extremely well set up to not only understand the issues of today, understand the health needs of that community very clearly, but actually use the leverage of those practitioners and all of their patients to create a movement locally to get themselves in office as an independent and push for this to become the new standard. And I think that is an obvious pathway forward, and hope that if that resonates with you, I'd love to connect with you and push you to some of the courses that we've already made with the United Independence Group as a pathway to that sort of success. One of the speakers on that panel is someone that I admired for a long time, and we've actually had on the Functional Forum before, but always virtually, and that is Dr. Zack Bush, and we sat down for an extended interview with him. This is one of the highlights of my career here at the Functional Forum. I hope you enjoy. All right, so super exciting moment for the Functional Forum, 11 years of Functional Forum, many Zooms, but the first time in person. Dr. Zack Bush, great to be here with you. And what an auspicious time to be together. We're at the Independent National Convention, and I'd love you maybe to start by just the juxtaposition that we're in, where this is about independence, and I really resonate on that idea with independence, because so many of the doctors in our community had to go independent to actually practice this new standard of care. But at the same time, if I think there's one word that I would think about your career, it's interdependence and what you've taught us in all the different ways that you've worked. So why don't you start there? Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I think that it's a natural process of iterative journey of change, and that it's very difficult for the Titanic to pivot on that dime. And so the rugged individualist plays a very important role in making any form of change, whether that's your political activist or your medical activist, whatever it is. That rugged individualist has a personality that's really bred for that isolation that comes with that independence that you're speaking to there, I think. And so those are heroes among us, there's no doubt about it. But ultimately, there's very few personalities that are going to be able to forge that and then tolerate that for a career length. And frankly, I know a lot of those rugged individualists who've shaped this career, and I don't think it's been good for their health either. I think that isolation really catches up with us. So even when we're able to do it, we may not supposed to be doing it. So that's where we start to understand natural systems have never done isolation. There are cells and microbiome, or in the agricultural work that I'm involved with a lot, there's a weed that will lead the charge to re-nutrifying soil. And so there is that process, but the weed never stays isolated. Within a single season, it's now invited in resources, it's created its purpose, it may be stepping to a different location, but it's now enriched that environment, now you have biodiversity. I think that's where we're at with the functional medicine movement, kind of burning itself out in some ways, on some level, in that it's asking each doctor to go be their own ecosystem in some ways and provide everything. That's the exhausting thing about functional medicine. And I come from internal medicine, very allopathic training, which had the luxury of specialization so that we were always part of teams. And so as an internal medicine doc, I was communicating with pulmonologists and cardiologists, and all the time I had the specialists around me. Then I became a specialist in endocrinology and metabolism, and I was always plugged into a larger care team, and you never felt like the buck stopped entirely at you, that I got a surgeon that will work with you. And that's the beauty of academia in some ways, is this constant interconnectivity. Finding myself kind of launched out of academia as I started to decide I need to do nutrition. That's all I knew at the time. I didn't know anything about nutrition. I just had this deep conviction, this is my path. So it started out there very lonely and nearly destroyed myself in those first 2 years of just loneliness and isolation. And then the team started to come. And so I think that's what we need to encourage one another in, is like we have to be functioning in multidisciplinary teams. For me, as my clinic kind of cranked through about 14 years of iterations, and before I closed it, and I closed it largely because we had found ways to create international teams that were working independent locations, but were able to collaborate on single patient care and all that. So a lot of your software platforms are, I think, allowing for that level of teamwork to start to happen. So I'm excited about it. I think we're going to start creating a landscape of interconnected resources rather than, highly trained functional medicine docs that are out there on their own trying to keep their head above water.
Does this follow a process that you would see in nature? Is this the way that things change?
Yeah, I think ultimately there's something called a wolf tree in the forest. The wolf tree is this tree that leads the charge on restarting a forest out of a grassland. And so as grasslands turn to savanna to forests, these wolf trees are the first to kind of spring up and be the pioneer, and then they spend much of their life feeding biodiversity around it. So they feed other tree species to come in and everything else. And I think that would be the neat kind of maturation now as we move from functional medicine to something called health. I think it'd be nice if we just lost the word medicine somewhere in the mix, right? And so what is it going to look like to just foster health in community or an individual? And it's going to look like interconnected systems. And so I think functional medicine docs and some of our political change agents that we see here at the Independent National Convention, they could go through that reframing of, now I'm going to be a wolf tree instead of being the leader or the
lone wolf. The lone wolf. Tree, right? I'm
going to actually put all of my life force out into this biodiverse community, and I'm going to attract to me the things that I'm exhausted doing or I never had the expertise to do, and start feeding that force that will become a health movement rather than a medical care system.
Do you feel something special happening in this exact moment with regard to the sort of desire in the population for a health movement?
Yeah, it is special. I think it's called hopelessness. I think there's just a complete collapse going on. I think people are so exhausted. Doctors have never been so exhausted. Nurses have never been so exhausted. Everything between those two care models has never been so tired. Patients are exhausted dealing with the healthcare system, whether it be their insurance or their, doctors that they can never reach, or everybody's just so exhausted of that current system. So the nice thing about that apathy that sits in is it solves for some of that, tendency of humans, since we've been living in this masculine paradigm of fix the problem. Instead of fixing it, we need to let something new emerge. And I think our collective hopelessness and exhaustion is actually setting that playing field for a future health paradigm to emerge. And so I really respect you and everybody who's like putting lots of irons in the fire, saying we know it's about to change, not sure how it wants to emerge, but let's put all the irons in the fire, see what goes warm, see what goes hot, see what melts, and just let's keep doing that and trusting that something we can't even imagine is about to happen.
Yeah.
So far we've been doing, I'd say, kind of linear pivots from an allopathic model to a more holistic version of care through many different things, and not just, functional medicine is one tiny category, but this independent or integrative medicine environment has been interesting. I ended up folding my clinic for a program called Journey of Intrinsic Health, with the idea that health is all emergent from within the individual. And in some ways, the dean of my medical school kind of nailed it. On my first day of medical school, he came in and said, you all look very excited to be here, but I want to give you some bad news. 50% of everything you're going to learn in the next 4 years is completely wrong, and the bigger problem is we're not sure which 50% that is. So I was told 25 years ago that I was on a ghost chase of truth in some ways, and I would say I think I did figure out which 50% was wrong, and unfortunately it was 50% of everything. Like, it was a bunch of half-truths that I was taught, and nothing was fully true. Because we had been given a belief that humans were a species against nature, and so to get human health to happen, we had to sterilize the environment, we had to sterilize the bloodstream. And you see this in functional medicine all the time, or this whole phenomenon of dark field microscopy that kind of cropped up as a pseudoscience of its own. And I think some people are using it relatively scientifically, but I would say for the most part, it was a marketing scheme towards selling thousands of dollars of things that would sterilize the bloodstream. So they would smear the blood and say, oh my gosh, you have fungi and you have parasites and all this stuff, and now you need all these things to sterilize yourself. So whether you're in the allopathic hospital or your dark field microscopy functional medicine clinic, you have this belief and this fear of the patient is put into fear that nature is against them, and maybe nature's invading their body. And we created that with a completely non-scientific story around Lyme disease and all kinds of things, and so we've got a problem that functional medicine has really kind of just kicked the allopathic doc off the stool, gotten back on the same stool and said, you should fear nature. Here's a different toolbox to sterilize your environment, and you're going to win the game still. We're really moving to this opportunity now to just let go of all of that and say it's absolutely impossible nature is against us. And if there's a microbe that's overexpressed in our body at this moment, it's there by a natural process. And it's impossible that bacteria has stepped out of nature. And so we may feel like we're in wrong relationship to it, but it's not against us. And the relationship may be challenging to the point where you have fever, you have infection, you have something going on. But in fact, that's just asking your body asking you to lay down in a bed for a week and stop running around doing 32,000 things and relax, chill the hell out for a little bit, and let your right relationship with nature reestablish. And so I have a deep, deep trust now in my patients that nature is working within them. And when they feel that in me, that I trust their body, it's much easier for them to trust their own body. And that's intrinsic health starts to emerge. It's like, my God, when did we stop trusting these miracles that self-formed in our mother's wombs?
It's amazing as you say that. I started to see cross-pollination between like ideas from integrative medicine and ideas from evolutionary biology, and there was a constant theme there of nature. Well, it brings me on to something I've been dying to talk to you about, which is the Institute of Natural Law. And it sounds like, if I'm putting the pieces together, this is an effort to sort of describe what you're describing in letting nature take the lead. So can you share with our community a little bit about what the Institute for Natural Law is, why you decided to prioritize this above all the other things that you had, going on in regenerative agriculture and nutrition and so forth, and like what your hopes and dreams for it are?
Yeah, the Institute of Natural Law was born out of usually everything I create is not intended. It's always the consequence of witnessing a natural system. And so the drugs I used to create, I was developing chemotherapy out of vitamin A compounds, and stumbled into that through watching the ecosystem of cancer cells interacting, and realized there was a nutrient deficiency there, and maybe we shouldn't poison them, maybe we should feed them and see what would happen. And I found out by feeding nutrients to cancer cells, you got pretty phenomenal results. And so instead of it being your enemy, it's the most lonely, unnurtured cell in the body. And as I started to trust that system, then it led to agricultural systems and Project Biome is our international project of revisioning how human systems can come in line with this natural regenerative cycle that the planet's about to tip into, which is going to turn North Africa green. Saudi Arabia will be a grassland again. Like, the world will look completely different than we currently think it does, because we only remember a few decades back. Just 600 years ago, North Africa was one of the most verdant soil systems in the world. It's growing all the food for Europe. And so we have short memory for all that, but it's there. And so Project Biome came out of the realization that this whole climate crisis story was actually just describing symptoms and not looking back to understand the context in which humans are experiencing climate change. And so Project Biome grew out of a lot of that, food systems included in that. Farmer's Footprint became our regenerative agriculture kind of activation. But the deeper we got in that, we realized, man, farmers can't do the right thing because the USDA has stacked the cards against the change of philosophy, because you can only get crop insurance from the USDA if you're growing conventional crops. And you can't get insurance for a regenerative multi-species, seed crop going into the ground that's not going to have any chemical inputs. If you can't get insurance, then the bank's not going to give you loans for your inputs that spring. Yeah. So we suddenly realized that we're asking change to happen in an ecosystem where there has to be a field effect rather than an individual changing it. So the functional medicine doc, like your regenerative farmer, simply can't change the system. And I've heard you say that some about what your journey's been, is like, well, we did this one thing, but we realized that these docs can't actually change the medical system.
Yeah.
And so that's where the Institute of Natural Law was birthed out of. Is like, until we write our philosophy of how we are functioning as a society on this planet, we're going to continue to symptomatically create self-destroying and self-distracting resources and solutions that don't actually get at this core.
Yeah.
So the Institute of Natural Law is recognizing that our root wound of humanity is an abandonment disorder from nature. And as soon as you have an abandonment disorder in a patient, and any medical doc listening to this would know, that's usually the foundation for an addiction problem. And so you can't have alcoholism, you can't have drug addiction, you can't have porn addiction, whatever you're addicted to, unless there's an abandonment disorder that sits beneath that. And so when you look at humanity as a whole, what you can say is we are the addicted patient. We're addicted to everything that we touch. And so we can be addicted to anything mentioned so far, but just looking at our food system, you put sugar in front of us, we'll be addicted to it in a couple of days. You put fat in front of us, we'll be addicted to that. You put protein in front of us, we'll be addicted to that. Like, we are just an inherently addictive neurology that has to be rooted in this abandonment disorder. So natural law is this interesting recognition of, wow, we just have this really core root wound that then had this tragedy of domino effect that kind of trickled down. So as soon as you go into abandonment or isolation from nature in your philosophy, you immediately develop the sense of scarcity. And with scarcity, then you develop an ownership model. And with ownership model, you develop empire. And with empire, you develop slavery and sex trafficking and all the other horrible things that are happening on the planet today. And so we are in this domino fall that ends us somewhere around radicalization and exploitation of children and war. That's kind of where you end up. Yeah. And so we've ended up at the bottom cascade of our separation or abandonment from nature. So the Institute of Natural Law is there as kind of a playground in some ways for us all to get together and start to say, what does my industry look like if a natural system was in charge? If nature wasn't my enemy as an engineer or a physician or a lawmaker or a lawyer, or for that matter, a truck driver, what would my daily look like if nature had devised my system? If I was working for a system in nature? And the answers are actually relatively quite beautiful, oftentimes self-emergent. And my dean taught me that on that first day of medical school too. One of the other profound things he said is, to be a good doctor, you're not going to implement all the things you're about to learn, you're going to listen. And if you listen to a patient long enough, they're going to tell you exactly what's wrong with them. And if you then have a greater discipline not to do anything and keep listening, they'll tell you what they need to do to heal it.
Yeah.
And that's a good doctor. And so that has stuck with me a lot. And I think that that's ultimately what we need to now do to nature. Instead of us rushing around thinking we have a climate crisis and nature's now really against us, why don't we listen to nature long enough to let her tell us what the problem is? And it's probably got something to do with our root wound that, dear child, you are not abandoned. dear child, you are here to be loved back in. Like, I'm sitting here with open arms and I'm going to just heal you so fast. Just come into my arms, you know? And so that grace that is built into nature is what the Institute is hoping to lead us into. Can we create a playground where we're listening in and then just with almost joy see the child provided for?
Can I pitch you on what I think I've witnessed from being in functional medicine for 20 years as to what that looks like in our industry?
Please.
So in my industry, what I think nature is calling for long-term human health, and I know that we've both put a poker into this fire,
Yeah.
I think the center of the care paradigm is the group.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's abandonment, you need connection, you need community, you need safety. And, I've been part of a men's group for 5 years. I now know that the coherence of my men's group is so strong that, men with mental illness can enter the group and turn around like that because they've never been part of a coherent structure like that. And they just melt into the fact that there's another way and that these guys all speak the language and are all in agreement about what it should be. And so I think the center of chronic disease reversal or health creation is the group. And the group drives the behavior change, it drives the safety, it drives the accountability, it drives the support, and it also drives our ability to deflect the poison, right? One way or another, to keep the poison away from us, because it's hard to do that as an individual, but it's actually kind of easier to do it as a group. That's why, I grew up in community, so I kind of know what that looks like on that end. But so that's my thesis, is that that's the center of it. And then there can be well-trained doctors who can do either functional medicine-y stuff or allopathic medicine stuff as needed. But that's sort of like, it's not the center of the solution. And that's what I feel is the wrong way around. It's not about adding groups to a structure which I tried to do and had a business doing it. It's about rethinking it with the community at the middle.
You're spot on. It's spot on. I mean, that's what we see in natural systems all the time, is the solution's always connectivity. And in my basic science laboratory, we've been studying this for 15 years now, as we extract the cellular communication network, the wireless communication network of the microbiome, and then put human cells in there. And when you immerse a human cell system in a communication network, the first instinct of the cell is to increase connection to all of the other cells around it. And so you've got isolated damaged cells that we can expose to glyphosate, which is the most common herbicide, or alcohol, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Any of these things will break all of the connections between the cells. So you have isolated cells, and then you just give them a wireless communication network so that they get a sense that somebody else is there and they're part of a community. They immediately start throwing tight junctions into each other, and those tight junctions look like Velcro. And now you suddenly have this cohesive membrane. Seconds later, they lay down gap junctions right behind the tight junction, which is a complex bundle of fiber optic cables that is moving light and resources between cells. And so the speed at which you guys are healing each other in your men's group is going to be exactly equal to the number of fiber optic cables you've put to each other. You guys are light beings that are now interconnected, and those men start to feel a little bulletproof because their week can go to hell, but they know their core identity is still witnessed by this group. And I think that's actually what healing looks like, is remembering your core identity. And we cannot do that in isolation. We have to have the mirrors around us to see that core identity. And so the love that you have for those few men has come out of the fact that you have come to know yourself by the mirror and the patience and just the stalwart presence that they have been in your life.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely, like you say, the thing that's missing from most human beings' experience on any day, especially when they get sick.
Yeah.
Sickness is such an isolating journey in our current format of allopathic or Western medicine. You don't even want to see humans, because if you're just barely dealing with your own emotions, now everybody else is emoting on you, their fear of your cancer or whatever it is. Like, your instinct is just to isolate, and now you're doomed to a path of, that isolation effect, which ends up being the malignancy of life. So reconnection is it. And, very humbly and transparently, I'd say I really screwed that up for many years. In my clinic, I was just so enamored with that one-on-one connection between me and the patient. I felt like I was so present, I could just move mountains. So then when we created the first Journey courses, they were all one-on-one, one coach, one client.
Yeah.
And I stuck with that for years. And my team kept saying, I think it's going to work better and it would be cheaper for our people if we do groups. And I was like, no, it's so important to have that witness. And then COVID came along and we were like, oh my gosh, everybody's so lonely and isolated. We got to get groups going. So I remitted. this past year, so it took 3 years of watching group versus single, and we finally closed the one-on-ones, realizing it was not nearly as effective than being in a group of 6 to 8 people that are witnessing your journey. And when you are witnessed in healing, it sticks, you know. And I think that's one of the sad things is, in the same way that we tend to beat ourselves up, we tend to forget how cool our own healing journeys are and how profound one week can be to another if we're not witnessed. And so just by putting people in those small groups like you're experiencing is a core reality. It's how we'll remember who we are.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, to take the concept that I've just seen from, you know, looking at clinics and trying things out and taking it to the sort of, you know, the how nature goes about that is really profound. You know, I knew that you were, you know, innovating in groups. Is there anything that you could share from those experiences now running these groups that you think could be valuable for doctors who dragging, kicking and screaming to try and like put groups at the center of their care paradigm, and things that you think that they could learn from your experience? Because you've done it at a reasonable scale.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, typical doctor's got maybe, you know, somewhere between 1,500 and 10,000 patients, depending on the structures of your care environment. So if we say maybe average in 3,000 range or something like that. So you got 3,000 patients and you're seeing those one at a time, and you're facing this deluge of challenge of trying to get enough information in them to create the lifestyle change that you at your core know you would love to see as a doctor. You'd rather not them be on the drugs and the decline. And when you find out that the community is there to help you to that end, that you are not the stopgap that nature's been waiting for, you are actually, you're the coordinator. You could step into, instead of the one-on-one, you could step into a role where you feel like you're suddenly the conductor of an orchestra. And you now can hear the symphony of health, and you can move your wand, and suddenly the group over there is motivated to achieve that in one another. And they never even need to see your face, and they're so much more empowered by the fact that they did that together and not needing your MDs to sit there and give them validation for their healing journey. On one level, it challenges your identity as a doctor. My self-worth for a long time was I am valuable because I can show up and deliver all of this information, and I have all this know-how and scientists. It was a crisis of identity, certainly, when I closed my clinic in favor of group, you know, healing. But the result has been I have been so much more creative in my life, and I've created a bunch of businesses and nonprofits, and I'm just feel like I'm literally oozing creativity these days. I'm writing more songs on my guitar and piano than I ever have. Like I'm just like amazed at where I am, because my parasympathetic nervous system is now my dominant space of living in. And my self-value is no longer about being a doctor at all. In fact, most days I forget that I spent 25 years being a doctor and doing all the education, all this stuff. Like that doesn't come into my daily purview because I'm so curious about what's going to come through today. And so just would encourage everybody to realize like the metrics of value that society has pigeonholed you with as a practitioner is keeping you out of creativity. And it's very unlikely you really want to sit with 15 patients a day and say the same thing over and over again. It's highly unlikely that that's your creative expression of an ancient soul that showed up here at the tipping point of all things. You pick this time to be the most creative being that it could possibly happen. You have so many resources and tools to create in speeds and ways and beauties that we just have never had at our fingertips before. So just encouraging each of us as practitioners to remember that our self-worth is not in service to others, but in witnessing beauty. And you'll start to witness so much more healing when you let go of that codependent relationship that I had with my patients in deep ways. So well, the goal of the Functional Forum at the beginning was to create aspirational stories where doctors would go, I want that. And that was it. So thank you for doing that. The one last piece I want to just drill down on that a little bit, because I just feel like the part of it that people don't realize they're going to get when they do that is, let's say you're a doctor and you take care of 1,000 patients, and for all the patients that are on your register, there's also the family members and the friends of family members, and you get all those calls too, right? Most doctors I know are in all of that too, especially if they're like primary care, pediatrics, family medicine, right? There's something about the group when you can like take off the weight of being so much of that to everyone in their life, and that you can give them these other people that hold some of that for them. It's like a huge weight comes off your shoulders because they've got someone else that they can ask that first question to. Because most of those questions are kind of below your pay grade, you know, in that thing for people. Not always, but I just feel like
most doctors have never had that experience. Once they start putting all that weight on, they've never had a chance to like take it off, and they don't really know they're holding it. And when they do hold it and they see self-efficacy in the community because people are supporting each other and starting with your patients, but then maybe getting into your friends, I've seen it happen, and I've seen people just
shake it off.
Yeah, shake it off.
Yeah. And you can't imagine how beautiful it is to see everything that's been crammed into your head and your life experience repurposed. There was such a fear that I had wasted 25 years of my life, learning all that stuff and doing
Technical
this.
debt.
And going into bankruptcy with my clinic, whatever it is, like you feel like, oh my God, I just screwed up so much of my life. As soon as you take off all that weight that you describe, all of that becomes your paintbrushes, and you just start doing things with the knowledge in you that's so much more beautiful to watch it applied in such different manners. And you might find out that you're literally doing artwork as an outflow of it, and you're painting or you're doing whatever it is. But when you find an artistic expression of the dogma that we were trained into, you find out that the dogma had beauty in it. There's a beautiful thing of knowing what a human cell is. There's a beautiful thing about having done gross anatomy and dissected a human being into its oblivion of a trillion different parts and pieces. And we are miraculously trained, and we hold such beauty in our cognition, and we forget about it because it's so buried in the doingness of doctoring. And so just trust that everything that's been seeded in you can just grow into a massively abundant, food forest of nurture in your own life. Just these tidbits of juicy pieces that you're going to find that are growing out of the seeds that academia or your medical practice really set into you. And so I don't know, I'm just in a blissful state of life right now where it's just like the more I surrender, the faster everything grows and the more beautiful it gets, and things that I can't imagine happen every few seconds now, it feels like. And so just to encourage all of us to keep encouraging each other. If anybody needs group healing, it's doctors. Like, we need to find each other, and we need to find the nurses, we need to find the social workers, and we need to come into small group and just celebrate a completely different method of just learning trust of the human body and learning trust of nature's capacity to express itself through us rather than be in combat with us.
Beautiful. Well, Zack, I just want to finish off by saying that many people came into the functional medicine world through the route of pain and suffering, right? The kid was sick, the wife was sick, the family member was sick, they didn't have the toolbox, and they needed a new toolbox, and they came. And for many people, that was a pathway for them, and I honor that so much. And I, now in the last year, I've had a little bit of that, but I came into this world because I was messaged divinely that this is what I need to be doing with my life. And I want to just thank you, because I know that operating at the cross-section of the new medical paradigm and this sort of emergent spirituality paradigm has been so valuable for so many who have had that same call. And I just want to honor you for the depth that it takes to navigate that in time where it was emergent, and to now play the role that you're playing, whatever that is and whatever it is in the future, whatever the Institute of Natural Law turns into, but that role of tuning fork, into, what's happening, or trim tab, it's really powerful to know you. And I'm just grateful for, there's been many times where I felt like we're gonna do great things together.
I feel that. I think, and that's the fun thing, is there's this quantum entanglement that happens among all of us, is even just the idea of doing it differently begins this cooperative, collaborative force of nature within us. So, I think it's exciting for us to acknowledge that there is no need to have an output. There is a need to have the imagination, and so just for all of you who feel like it'd be such a large leap from where you're currently at to maybe what would feel fun and exciting and liberating every day, it really just begins in our dreams. And I started dreaming dreams in 2010, I guess, is when it started happening. And then by 2014, some of them were starting to come to reality. I had my own laboratory by then. We were able to ask some really amazing questions that I could have never asked in academia. And so there's an excitement that happened about that far in, but it really didn't start to come to fruition until a decade or two later. But I had more fun at the beginning of the dream than I do even now in some ways. So it's just so cool that just the dream itself can just liberate our heart and our spirit. And then we get entangled in it. And while I'm just being introduced to some of your projects today, I feel like I already know those projects. I feel like I've seen them before. I feel like I've seen you before. I feel like I know what you're up to. because we're coming out of, we are the things that are emerging from nature. It's not necessarily what we're waiting to figure out. It's going to emerge. We are literally emerging from the natural fabric of this world to express whatever nature is wanting to express. And so I recognize your tree, I recognize the grassland around us, and so I'm excited to be in that community of nature emerging through us.
Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much. We're here at the Independent National Convention, but for now, it's been a pleasure.
Such a pleasure.
Take care. I'll give you a hug.
Yeah, take that.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. All right, we're here with Angel Oakley and hoping for some stories on the cross-section of running for office and creating health. And here we are. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how those things have intersected for you.
Well, in 2024, I decided that I was going to run for U.S. Congress in the 3rd Congressional District for Illinois.
Okay.
And a big reason that I decided to throw my name into the race was because the chronic disease epidemic of our children is getting worse and worse. And I experienced that firsthand in my own household with my children being chronically ill, and we have had to do a lot of interventions, but we found that the answers weren't in the traditional medical system. And so I would like to be part of the solution to help bring health and wellness back to families that are struggling with chronic disease. And with Bobby Kennedy running in the race and bringing that to the forefront, I felt it was a great time to add to the conversation.
So how did you run and what happened?
So I filed as an independent, which meant that in Illinois you have to get 10 to 15,000 signatures to get on the ballot, whereas a Republican candidate had to get 277. And that process over 90 days was incredibly arduous. And we were able to end up with 8,400 signatures. In Illinois, you're automatically on the ballot as long as you have a parent conformance. But the Democrats decided to go ahead and file an objection, and they had me removed from the ballot. So I'm currently doing write-in candidacy.
And you're a health coach?
So I have been a health coach for a number of years, and I've also worked with medical cannabis. And then I've also worked in the marketing profession.
What do you see for the future then now for you?
So I'd like to still be part of the conversation. I really want to challenge our legislators about the money that's allocated for health and wellness. They recently had a bill that allocated $100 million each of 4 years for mental health. I care a lot about mental health, but we are not going to medicate our children to wellness. And so we need to look at all the impacts, what's influencing that mental health crisis, just like what's happening with the diabetes epidemic and obesity. And we need to look at the inputs and actually address that rather than just putting more medications into our children, which doesn't seem to be working.
Sounds like a plan. Well done on taking the steps, and look forward to the journey from here.
Thank you.
All right. All right, I'm here at INC with the certified health nut, Troy Casey. Troy, why did you come to the INC?
I was invited, and I'd like to share my message of self-care education.
So a lot of the doctors that we're working with, how progressing from being in the system to being independent, practicing medicine on their own terms and helping people get healthy. You have any sort of advice for them in that journey, particularly maybe as it relates to men's health and getting men engaged into health?
Yeah, well, first of all, I honor all the doctors that have gone that path, because that's not an easy path, especially with the cost of the education that you got, and it's all intertwined with the insurance game and the system, really. And most of my methodologies are to help men break out of, men and women, but mainly men, help them break out of the matrix simulation and actually dance to the beat of their own drum. And I teach fundamental principles. There's nothing new underneath the sun. We are of the earth. We're in symbiotic relationship with the earth, with each other. And so it's a good idea to practice fundamental principles, or what they call in physics, first principles. So the body needs to move, the body needs to sleep. The body's mostly water, good idea to get some pure water. Body is made up and replicates its cells utilizing materials from the earth, so it's a good idea to get pure food as well. And so forgiveness, gratitude, sunlight, grounding. I do believe men need a purpose, so I think legacy is important, as well as relationships, forgiving everybody and and everything, and just keep moving forward as best we can, and coming together on what matters most, which is air, water, and soil. Those are the things that make life on Earth hospitable. So once we're done voting with our dollars and investing on our own bloodstream, then we go out and figure out how we can unify with our local community and build alliances, first in the community and then ultimately with the world, because we're all one or none is my big message.
Awesome. Well, dude, keep up the great work. To me, the energy of the Functional Forum has always been about uniting independents. The goal early on was to connect independent doctors practicing a new standard of care together and see what happens. Now that same movement is afoot in the political spectrum, and I think that this is a movement that we should connect with, be aligned with, and I hope that this has been an interesting insight into what's happening in the movement. Thanks so much for tuning into the Functional Forum, and we'll see you next time.